Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello, everybody. Welcome to one more week of the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. And this week, I have the pleasure to have with me Jean Coetzee. Is that how I pronounce your name, Jean? Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Vasco. Yes, the name was pronounced correctly. My surname is Coetzee, if we had to put it in my local language, but yeah, that's good
Coetzee.
enough.
Okay, good. I remember the surname because it's also the surname of a famous writer who, if I remember correctly, even won a Nobel Prize for literature, a South African writer, just like you. So I'll have to look up his name, but I'm sure we're going to talk about him as well in a second. All right. So everybody, welcome Jean. Jean is passionate about humans and how they work together from a psychology and neuroscience perspective. And he also credits the early Scrum Master podcast for shaping his Agile career. The insightful episodes that he listened to provided vital guidance during the early days, boosting his confidence in serving others effectively. Jean also learned to navigate uncertainties and gain confidence in his Scrum Master role, all thanks to this and, of course, other podcast contribution in the community. And definitely you, Jean, is why we do this podcast, you and all of the other Scrum Masters out there. So I'm happy to hear that this has been a positive influence in your career. So tell us a little bit more about yourself and how did you end up becoming a Scrum Master?
Thank you, Vasco, and thank you for that insightful introduction of me. I started my early career as a desktop support engineer, and I interacted with people quite frequently. And one of the things that intrigued me about human interactions was it depended on the way in which we interacted, and it actually assisted me in how I was able to solve the problems for my users. So I quickly transitioned from that into project management because I was interested in how can I scale that into different areas and to different ways of working. And I quickly realized that also that the interactions was taken away from when it started coming to deadlines and the pressure on teams. And I researched and did a lot of reading and discovered throughout the time that Agile was the way that I was trying to think about things. And I researched more and read some more and finally discovered some people that I could interact with and found myself as a Scrum Master. So that's how I transitioned in short, from being a project manager into a Scrum Master.
So I can totally empathize with that transition. And being a project manager by training myself, I still call myself a recovering project manager because I believe we never really stop being who we are. And if we learn something, it's going to be with us forever. And sometimes I do have to fight those tendencies as well. But of course, also that means that when you look at the Scrum Master role, you have a whole host of ideas, concepts, methods you've learned in the past. And I don't know if you're going to bring those up, but we are going to talk about failure. And I myself have failed trying to apply project management thinking into a Scrum Master problem. But first, let's dive into your topic, the topic or the story you have to share with us, Jean, where you as a Scrum Master, you had a difficult moment. And of course, we all do, and we learn a lot from that. We'll talk about the learnings later, but tell us that story first.
Of course, Vasco, thank you. And of course, we have many different difficult situations that we do face. And sometimes I do think about those situations even today because I come across them and they keep repeating themselves. So when we look at the patterns that we come across, we see these recurring things coming up over and over again. The challenge that I would like to discuss with you today is about ownership. And quite frequently, I come across teams and individuals more specifically that fail to understand the importance of ownership and accountability, and trust that has to do with interactions with other team members. And sometimes when the team does not have a very good trust relationship with each other, it is often related to ownership, accountability, or responsibility. I see them as three different concepts. And for me, it starts with responsibility, and being held responsible is often what we're familiar with. So going from that into accountability, we have to understand why do we have to be accountable, and why is it important for my team to be accountable? And from there on, how important is ownership, and what is ownership? And making a distinction between them and interacting with the teams in such a way, and making clear what the language is that we use to describe what those things are. We can often find ourselves solutions to those difficult situations. So I'll give you an example of a team where I had this before, and it's a team that was a new team to Scrum. They they were familiar with some Scrum, Agile concept or Scrum framework concepts, and I asked them if they would be interested in knowing a little bit more about the different frameworks within the Agile framework, because there are so many, and it's good to learn what the reasoning and the meaning behind all of these principles and concepts are. So we tested them, and ultimately what came about is that they didn't feel like there was anything that resonated with them. They felt like, why don't we just work, right?
So you were explaining the concepts, the ideas, the frameworks, and they were like looking at you perhaps a little bit blank-faced and saying, well, why are you telling us this? Like, why aren't we just doing the tasks, I guess they would say.
Yes, correct. And what quickly I came to realize was that they potentially did not understand the intention of these principles and practices. So we needed to experiment. And I obviously went ahead and I tried to do it in the best way possible with the most amount of experience that I had at the time, which wasn't a lot, if I may add. But this is an early challenge that I've seen with ownership. So I must just clarify that it wasn't a simple thing for me to understand at first, but it was the first realization.
What do you mean by a challenge with ownership?
A challenge with ownership, it has to do with the ability to grasp a concept and see that it is better potentially than the current way of applying effort, and the effort that is going into a particular piece of work, and then manifesting out of that the need to show to either the team, or it could be for the individual, that I am willing to go above and beyond what is expected of me. So you're meeting your teammates' expectations, plus you're going that extra mile beyond, and you continue to do so because you're owning it. You feel completely that you completely own whatever item or task it is that you are applying yourself to. So that is, to me,
and you didn't see that in the team.
No.
Okay.
That was not very prevalent. It was at a very elementary stage where they were told to do something. They were there day to day for a salary. There was no purpose. There was a detachment with purpose with the team.
So it is a little bit, this is kind of a or anti-pattern, I should say, that we very often hear about here on the podcast, which is this idea of just give me what to do and I'll work on it. There is some form of commitment, right, to do the stuff that you're being asked to do, but there is not what I would call perhaps the core commitment that Agile talks about, and specifically Scrum talks about, which is the commitment to do our best and help each other to deliver something of value to someone. Could be a stakeholder, the company, or a customer, right?
That's right. Yes, it's a core value. Well, I mean, I feel there isn't sufficient words to describe this value that we are talking about. I think our vocabulary is quite limited to describe this, what we're trying to unpack here. It gets very complex, and I would make reference to Sonia Blichnout because she's got a very good concept around complexity. We have complex environments around us all the time, and that we need to embrace these complex environments. And not being able to describe what it is that we're talking about is part of it, and we need to embrace it. It shouldn't make us anxious. Actually, we should settle into the complexity. That's the message I would take away from that. But I feel without rambling too much, I feel like the concept of ownership has to do with those three facets: responsibility, accountability, and then as a leveling up system into ownership. And it's quickly that you can actually see when a high performing team is actually owning their things, because that's one of the key concepts that you see resonate from most of these high performing teams.
And if you had to go back in time and kind of be there with that team again, what might be some things that you would try out with that team? Some experiments you might want to run if you had the ability to go back in time?
I like to use metaphors. So the thing that I would do is to explain to them the idea of pushing a car from point A to point B, and they may discover that the car does not have fuel, and they need to push the car. And if they had to stop for a moment and realize that the task is not about pushing the car, the task is getting the car from point A to point B, and owning that idea or the problem, of course, they need to be afforded that ownership as well. I mean, it's not just the team that is in control of that, because we always have leaders and we have got managers as well, and again, make distinction between a leader and a manager for good reason. The leader might be someone that assists them in coming to that conclusion, or even the Scrum Master, servant leadership maybe. But the manager may say, push this car from point A to point B. The leader might say, get the car from point A to point B. Two very different ideas. Now, if the team is pushing the car and they are constantly finding struggle to keep up the energy or be sustainable, or whatever concept that we are trying to convey to them, they are not going to stop and listen to what you have to say, because their task is to push the car, right? And nothing else.
Yeah, and that's all they
change.
See. Exactly. And that's all they see, right?
That's all they see. That's all they see. Yeah.
That's a very good point. The narrowing of vision when we define our work in a certain way, of course, then takes the ownership away, because we basically accepted that somebody else owns the work we are doing. We're just doing it. Absolutely. Great story and great metaphor. Thank you for that, Jean. Monday is about what we learn from our obstacles and our failures. But tomorrow is Team Tuesday here on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. We explore teams and their journeys, the habits they develop that threaten their performance, how each of our guests help their teams evolve, and the one key lesson they learned from that experience. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.